actual vampire attacks to whole towns plagued by the undead. Join us as we take a look at 5 real vampires that actually existed. And before we get into it, remember to hit that subscribe button for more creepy content just like this. In 1912, the US state of Louisiana was gripped by fear after a bizarre spate of murders. The victims were all found dismembered in their own home, but there was little to no blood present at the scene. After police efforts to catch the murderer proved futile, rumours began circulating that the culprit may actually be a vampire. After several more bodies were discovered, the locals pleaded with Father Henry Jante, a local Catholic priest, for help. Jante met with a local voodoo priest by the name of Moses Amashan, and together they decided to hunt the vampire. The two holy men set about mapping the crimes. They discovered that the murders seemed to follow the train line, leading them to believe that the person they were looking for might be employed by the railway. They began to monitor one particular station where they spotted a man neither had ever seen before. He was ghostly pale and appeared to have blood smeared on his clothing. Here's where the reports get even stranger. In an effort to learn the man's identity, it was said that the priests hunted down and destroyed several minions who confirmed that the man, August Delagrange, was indeed the head vampire they were looking for. The next night, the two men made their way to an isolated shack deep in the middle of the bayou. Delagrange was sleeping inside, presumed weak from lack of feeding. Jante took a wooden stake and drove it straight into the heart of the beast. Jante claims that Delagrange didn't make a sound, only opened his eyes wide and stared into the face of the priest before fading into hell. August Delagrange was believed to have murdered more than 40 people before he was staked by the priest. Today, his skeleton can be seen on display at the Vampire Museum located on the outskirts of the French Quarter in New Orleans. This photo here is of a small wooden box said to contain the vampire's heart, along with the wooden stake that killed him. In 1726, a man named Arnold Pale was reported to have become a vampire in the small Serbian town of Medwenja. According to reports compiled by several Austrian military doctors who were sent to investigate the case, Pale was said to have become a vampire after falling to his death from a hay wagon. The villagers said that Pale often claimed that he had been plagued by a vampire in his former homeland, but that he believed he had cured himself by eating soil from the vampire's grave and smearing himself with its blood. Shortly after Pale's death, members of the village began claiming to have been attacked by him. In each case, the witnesses mysteriously died just days later. When the local military heard of what was happening, they advised the villagers to open the suspected vampire's grave and examine the corpse. Despite being dead for 40 days, Pale's body was still intact and his veins contained fluid blood. His hair and beard had continued to grow and there was fresh blood in his mouth and on his shirt. The villagers concluded that Pale was indeed a vampire and drove a stake deep into his heart. As they did so, he is said to have let out a frightful shriek, groaning and bleeding. The villagers burned the body and then staked and burned the bodies of his 4 victims as well. About 5 years later, another spate of mysterious deaths began to plague the area. The locals believed that the first to die, a woman named Melitza, was to blame as she had once mentioned that she had eaten 2 sheep that had been killed by vampires. It was thought that those sheep were killed by the original vampire, Arnold Pale. Locals began reporting that the deceased were attacking them in the middle of the night. One girl by the name of Stanoska claimed she had been strangled in her sleep by a boy that had died 9 weeks prior. She passed away just 3 days later. Households gathered together in the evenings, some members standing watch while others slept. The locals complained to the military, who sent an infectious disease specialist named Glaser to investigate. He found that many of the diseased showed no signs of decomposition, and some even had fresh blood in their mouths. He compiled a report recommending that the authorities should pacify the population by fulfilling its request to execute the vampires. Shortly after, a second commission consisting of 3 military surgeons, one of whom was Dr. Johann Flukinger, as well as several other military officers who were sent to investigate. They too found that several of the older bodies had not decayed and their chests and other organs were filled with fresh blood. The surgeons summarized their findings by stating that the bodies were indeed in vampiric condition. The suspected vampires had their heads cut off and their bodies burned. The others were reburied in their graves. The amazing thing about this case is that it's been reported on by so many experts. The disease specialist Glasser even sent the details of his findings to his father, also a doctor and a correspondent of a prominent Nuremberg journal. He wrote a letter to the journal detailing the case, and the reports of both Glasser and Flukinger were reprinted in several articles. Could this small Serbian town have actually been plagued by vampires? Or did all these experts somehow get their reports wrong? Let us know what you think in the comments section below. In 1954, it was reported that a mysterious 7-foot-tall vampire with iron teeth was terrorising the residents in the Gorbals district of Glasgow, Scotland. After the vampire was said to have killed 2 young boys in the area, hundreds of school children descended on the local cemetery. Armed with knives and wooden stakes, the children searched the graveyard for the vampire. Even the police were powerless to stop the children, who only left the cemetery after it began to rain heavily. They continued their search for the elusive vampire for the next 2 nights. The story made headlines all around the world. Soon the whole country was in the grip of a full-blown vampire panic. Local parliamentarians believed that the source of the bizarre rumours could be traced back to a popular American comic book of the time. As a result, they championed the 1955 Children and Young Persons Harmful Publications Act, which was eventually passed. The act, which still stands today, prohibits comics that are believed to be harmful to children. While it was never clear whether or not the children ever found the vampire, several of those who descended on the cemetery in 1954 can still recall the bizarre tale. One vampire hunter, Ronnie Sanderson, said, "I was there, I was in the graveyard when I was 8 years old. I've been telling my wife about the vampire for years and she's never believed me." First published in 1746, the treatise on the apparitions of spirits and on vampires or revenants of Hungary was an extensive investigation into the paranormal written by Benedictine monk Anton Augustin Kelmet. The book covered all manner of the supernatural, from angels, demons and ghosts to witchcraft and sorcery. The work analysed accounts of the various topics from mythology and folklore, as well as the Bible and historically documented accounts. It was divided into 3 tomes, the second of which contained 63 chapters, all dedicated to vampires and the undead. One documented account was that of a soldier who, in 1730, was lodging at a peasant's house in Hungary. The soldier claimed that he was sitting with a homeowner and his family for dinner when a man that he didn't know entered the house and sat down. The soldier noticed that the homeowner appeared to be fearful of the unknown dinner guest. The next morning, the homeowner was discovered dead. The family told the soldier that the strange man that sat at the table the night before was actually the father of the homeowner, who had been dead for more than 10 years. The soldier informed his regiment and the army began to investigate. The captain of the infantry, along with several officers and a surgeon, interviewed members of the man's family, along with other residents of the village. The accounts matched those of the soldier, and the father's corpse was exhumed. They found that the father, although dead for more than 10 years, still had the blood flow of a living man. The captain ordered his head to be cut off and his remains reburied in the tomb. Sometime later, the same captain received information that another man who had been dead for more than 30 years returned to his family's home on 3 separate occasions. Each time he was said to have sucked the blood of one of the members of the house. Firstly his brother, then son, and finally a servant. All 3 men were reported to have died immediately after being attacked. Once again, the man was suspected of being a vampire and his corpse was exhumed. Just like the previous case, the man's body was found to have a living blood flow, despite the fact that he had been dead for more than 30 years. The captain ordered a large nail to be driven through the man's temple and his corpse placed back into the grave. Before we get to the #1 spot and learn about a famous vampire case that was reported in the media just a few decades ago, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on channel notifications. That way you'll be up to date with all our latest content. This photo, taken sometime between the late 1960s and early 70s, was captured in the Highgate Cemetery, London. The dark-robed figure in the centre of the image is believed by many to be a king vampire of the undead, said to have been a Romanian nobleman brought to London by his devoted followers. In 1970, sightings of the vampire grew. On Friday the 13th of March, two men, Sean Manchester and David Ferrant, vowed to find and destroy the evil creature. The media reported the story, and within 2 hours a mob of hunters from all over London began swarming over the locked gates of the cemetery to confront the beast. Manchester claimed he led a group to one particular catacomb where they managed to climb inside through a hole in the roof. He said they opened several coffins and placed garlic and holy water inside. Some months later, the charred and headless corpse of a woman was found near the catacomb that Manchester said he had entered. Ferrant was arrested soon after in the churchyard next to Highgate Cemetery, carrying a crucifix and a wooden stake. Shortly after Ferrant was arrested, Manchester and his group returned to the cemetery. This time they forced open the doors to another family vault where they believed the coffin of the vampire had been moved to. Just as Manchester was about to stake the body inside, he was persuaded to leave the vault by several members of the group. 3 years later, Manchester claimed he again encountered the same corpse. This time it was in the cellar of an abandoned house in the Highgate area. Believing it had to be the vampire he was searching for, he staked and burned the body. While mysterious sightings are still reported at the Highgate Cemetery to this day, no one knows for sure if the king vampire of the undead still lurks within the grounds. Was this cemetery actually home to a real vampire? Was the beast destroyed, or could it still lie waiting in a sinister slumber, soon to awake and take its next victim?
Well, that's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying our content, hit that upward facing thumb. Now in the comment section below, let us know what you thought of these vampire stories. What do you think, real or fake? Well, that's it from me. I'll see you all next time. Pew! How you doing? I'm Callan and this is Slapped Ham. The following list is about 10 real events that inspired some of the best, most notorious episodes of the X-Files, demonstrating that truth is indeed often stranger than fiction. And before we get into it, remember to hit that subscribe button for more awesome creepy content just like this.
This disturbing episode depicts Scully and Mulder delving into the case of Dwayne Barry, a violent mental patient who believes that he's been repeatedly abducted by aliens. During her investigation, Scully discovers that Barry has brain damage as a result of a gunshot to the head, leading to him becoming a pathological liar with psychopathic tendencies. Some of the aspects of this episode are based on the case of Phineas Gage, a 25-year-old railroad worker in Cavendish, Vermont. Gage suffered a severe brain injury after a 13-pound metal bar used to tamp sand on top of an explosive charge caused a spark that shot the bar through his face and skull. Until his injury, Gage had been an even-tempered individual, but his personality changed drastically after the accident. He showed signs of aggression and fitfulness, and was suddenly prone to the use of disturbing profanity, all behaviours that hadn't been demonstrated in the past. It was believed that this change in his behaviours was due to the severe damage to his frontal lobe as a result of the injury. Gage's case was believed to be the first to definitively prove that brain injuries can produce marked personality changes. While most of the X-Files episodes centre on the paranormal or conspiratorial, Irresistible takes a different approach with the introduction of Donnie Pfaster, a budding serial killer who crosses paths with Scully and Mulder. After losing his job as an assistant funeral director for taking a lock of hair from a dead woman, Pfaster moves on to exhuming dead bodies to remove their hair and fingernail clippings to add to his collection of trophies. Pfaster eventually resorts to murder to satisfy his macabre desires. As the episode progresses, Pfaster seems to change in appearance, further frightening his victims. Donnie Pfaster was strongly based on the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, who committed his first murder in 1978 at the age of 18. He was finally captured in July 1991, confessing to have murdered 16 young men since 1978. According to his surviving victims, Dahmer's appearance seemed to change during the course of their captivity, adding to his twisted creep factor. In space, Scully and Mulder visit NASA to investigate the possibility of shuttle sabotage resulting in an aborted launch. Another launch is scheduled, and initially it seems to be a success, but contact with the shuttle is soon lost and the shuttle crew find themselves in danger of incineration by the sun. It's soon revealed that Gemini astronaut Colonel Marcus Belt is keeping secrets. During a 1977 mission, he had a strange encounter with the face on Mars. Now he's being influenced by an astral presence that is apparently determined to see the destruction of the shuttle mission, along with the crew and the NASA program itself. In the end, Belt leaps from a window in an attempt to free himself of the possessing force. Chris Carter, the creator of the series, was inspired to write this episode after reading news articles about the face on Mars, as well as pareidolia, where the mind perceives a familiar image from random patterns. Carter also capitalized on the disappearance of the Mars Observer, which occurred around the same time this episode was in production, in August 1993. In this episode, a serial killer has the uncanny ability to project images of his darkest fantasies onto undeveloped film. Scully and Mulder are assigned to the case after photos developed at a pharmacy reveal a young woman screaming surrounded by a distorted background. While searching the killer's apartment, Mulder finds a camera that repeatedly produces the same image of the young woman seen earlier at the pharmacy, leading Mulder to the conclusion that the killer is somehow projecting his desires onto the film. Two different individuals were the basis for this episode of The X-Files. In the 1960s, Ted Sirios, a Chicago hotel worker, developed a talent for thoughtography, a unique ability to project mental images onto film by concentrated thought. His ability rekindled interest in paranormal photography due to the fact that he used Polaroid film, whereas others who claimed to have the ability used film and procedures that were both complicated and easily manipulated. Mass murderer Howard Unruh was the other individual who was the inspiration for this episode. On September 6, 1949, 28-year-old Unruh went on a killing spree dubbed the Walk of Death, killing 13 individuals and injuring 3 others before being apprehended by the police. His reasons for the killings involved personal grudges that he held against his neighbours and local shop owners. Unruh is generally considered to be one of the first lone wolf mass murderers that have led up to the workplace and school shooters that we see on the news today. After a Marine drives his car into a tree committing supposed suicide while working at a Haitian refugee camp, Scully and Mulder head to Haiti, where they soon discover rumours that the detainees are being abused by the camp commander. As they dig deeper, suggestions of curses and voodoo surface, with hints that the government may be at the root of it all. 2 articles about higher suicide rates amongst military personnel posted in Haiti inspired Howard Gordon to write this episode. A 1994 article stated that 3 soldiers had committed suicide over a 3-week period, with morale, living conditions and native reception all being named as possible issues for higher suicide rates. It was determined that the suicide rate was 15 times the US national average, and the assignment seems to have had an unusually negative effect on the soldiers stationed there, in comparison to other locations that are potentially more hostile. When a high-speed car chase ends in Vicky Crump's head exploding and her husband being escorted to the hospital in handcuffs, Scully and Mulder travel to Nevada to investigate. Once there, Mulder finds himself taken hostage by Patrick Crump, a desperate man determined to head west at high speeds to alleviate the pain in his head and prevent it from exploding just as his wife's did. It's left to Scully to find a solution that will save her partner, and she soon discovers that Crump is the victim of a brainwave experiment that can lead to intense inner ear pressure and fatality if he fails to travel towards the Pacific coast. The inspiration for this episode comes from 2 different government programs: Project ELF, a US Navy experiment involving long waves, and Project HARP, a US Army experiment involving electromagnetic radiation in the ionosphere. While the government claims that both HARP and ELF are for research purposes with thoughts towards better communication, conspiracy theorists believe the real purpose of these projects are more sinister, with the creation of new and deadlier weapons being the real motive behind the expensive projects. After receiving a tip that a religious cult leader is caching weapons and abusing children, a raid is staged at the Temple of the Seven Stars, resulting in the arrest of cult leader Vernon Ephesian, along with his wife Melissa and several other followers. Because they can only be held for so long without definitive proof, Ephesian and his followers are released, but another search of the compound for weapons is planned. Knowing that he won't be able to withstand further police interference, Ephesian instructs his men to open fire on the investigating agents, while he and the rest of the cult members drink poison to evade capture. Two different cults were the inspiration for this episode. The Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventists of Waco, Texas gained notoriety in 1993, when they and their leader, David Koresh, engaged in a 2-month standoff that ended in the death of Koresh and 82 of his followers. The Jonestown Massacre was also a source of inspiration for this episode. On November 18, 1978, Jim Jones ordered his followers to drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid in a South American jungle community, after Congressman Leo Ryan visited the compound to evaluate the welfare of Jones's followers. Those who refused to drink the poison were later shot. 909 people died in total. Home gained a lot of notoriety due to the fact it was the first episode of The X-Files to receive a viewer discretion warning due to the content that included incest and abuse. The discovery of a severely deformed baby in Pennsylvania soon leads Scully and Mulder to the Peacock brothers, who are found living in squalid conditions without even the basic amenities such as electricity and running water. Initially, it's thought that the brothers had kidnapped a woman to father a child, but eventually Scully and Mulder find there's evidence of incest in the family that involves the mother of the Peacock clan. Much of this episode was influenced by the story of the Ward brothers, 4 illiterate brothers who lived on a farm near Syracuse, New York. The Ward brothers lived in unbelievable squalor and were awkward in their behaviour, demonstrating very little in the way of social skills. In 1990, Delbert Ward was accused of killing his brother William while he was sleeping. He was later acquitted due to a lack of evidence. Lucy Householder was kidnapped by a deranged man and held captive in darkness for 5 years before making her escape. Several years later, Scully and Mulder investigate the kidnapping of Amy Jacobs, a young teenager who was kidnapped from her bed much as Lucy had been. During the course of the investigation, it comes to Mulder's attention that while at work, Lucy collapsed and suffered from a nosebleed at the same time that Amy was kidnapped. While Scully thinks that Lucy may have been involved in the kidnapping, especially after it's determined that her nosebleed consisted of an additional blood type that matches Amy's. Mulder is convinced of the woman's innocence and believes that she can help them to find the missing girl. Lucy begins to display spontaneous injuries that coincide with the injuries that Amy is receiving from her kidnapper. It's determined that a psychic link between the two has developed. Ultimately, Lucy gives her life in order to save Amy, an act facilitated by the psychic bond that they shared. This episode was heavily influenced by the kidnapping of 12-year-old Polly Klaas, whose kidnapping and murder were a primary news topic when the episode aired. On October 1st, 1993, Richard Allen Davies entered Polly's bedroom where she was having a slumber party and carried her away at knife point after tying up her 2 friends and placing pillowcases over their heads. Later that evening, a call was made to 911 that a vehicle was stuck in a ditch about 20 miles north of Petaluma, California, where Polly was kidnapped. Deputies investigated the call, not knowing about the kidnapping. Davis was the driver of the vehicle. After searching the car and running his license, a tow truck was called and Davis was free to go. On November 28, 1993, the owner of the property where Davis had been stuck found scraps of clothing that matched items that Polly was wearing at the time of the kidnapping, which eventually led to the arrest of Davis. On 4th, he confessed to kidnapping and strangling Polly and led police investigators to the shallow grave where he buried her. It's believed that Davis killed Polly and hid her body in the woods near the ditch where his truck was stuck. He later returned to retrieve the body after the deputies had left. Before we get to that number 1 spot and take a look at a truly bizarre case involving poisonous blood, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on channel notifications. That way you'll be up to date with all the latest content on our channel. Scully and Mulder investigate the case of Dr. William Sakare, a man who appears to have bled green blood after being shot by the police before disappearing without any other trace. Later, when Sakare is picked up by an ambulance, a poisonous gas is released from his body when paramedics attempt to insert a needle into his chest. It's later determined that Sakare is actually a human-alien hybrid whose blood is toxic to humans. The scene involving the release of poisonous gas from Dr. Sakare was directly inspired by the case of Gloria Ramirez. In February 1994, 31-year-old Ramirez was rushed to a California hospital due to the effects of late-stage cervical cancer. It was noted that her skin had an odd oily sheen, and when her blood was drawn, small particles were seen floating in it. Ramirez also had a fruity, garlicky odour coming from her mouth, and her blood gave off a strong smell of ammonia. Soon after drawing her blood, one nurse fainted while another developed breathing issues. Another nurse also fainted and later awoke without the ability to move her arms or legs. 6 individuals had health issues attributed to working on Ramirez, some requiring hospitalization. Ramirez died a short time later due to her cancer. It was eventually speculated that Ramirez had been using dimethyl sulfoxide as a treatment for her cancer. Defibrillation that she received could have converted it to dimethyl sulfate, which would have been toxic to those exposed to it. While this theory is the most popular one, it's never been definitively proven.
Well, that's it for another episode. Thank you so much for watching. Now, in the comments section below, let us know if you're an X-Files fan from way back in the day, and which was your favourite episode. If you're new to our channel and enjoying what you see, slap that upward-facing thumb. It really helps us out. And that's it for me. I'll see you all next time. Pew! How you doing? I'm Callan and this is Slapped Ham. Today we're looking at mysterious crop formations. From the Chilbolton Observatory incident to encoded messages from outer space. Join us as we take a look at 10 crop circles that have left authorities baffled.
This crop circle was found in Hampshire, England on the 17th of July 1997. It's of particular note as it's the first known crop circle to depict an insect, in this case an ant. The ant crop circle became so famous that copycat hoaxers have tried replicating the design in various fields around the world, but none come close to the intricate and precise nature of the original. Researcher Jonah O'Have claims to have visited as many as 60 crop formation sites, but ranks this one among his favourites. This enormous crop formation appeared on the 7th of August 2009 in southern Holland. It depicts a modified version of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. The man in the centre of the image has outstretched arms that span in